Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's Theological Leftovers. I haven't been doing this for a couple of weeks because I've been working on a few other projects. I am trying to put together a small book that I've had an idea for a couple of years, and I'm also putting a couple of indexes together. The book may never see the light of the day, but the indexes, at least for our congregation, I hope will be helpful. One of them, do I wouldn't even want to tell you right now? Well, one of them is I'm constantly saying that the hymnal is a good for our members, that the hymnal is better than any commentary that they can get. It should be, they should consider it their first commentary. Even if they have a study Bible, they should consider their hymnal before the study notes in their study Bible, because the hymnal is just, it's been tested, right? There's just so much good theology there. But somebody called me on that a little bit and said, well, okay, but when I'm studying a particular text, I don't necessarily know where to go in the hymnal if it even addresses that text. And so they sort of challenged me. I don't think they meant to, but they challenged me in my own mind to put an index together. So anyway, I'm working on an index that'll help people that when they are reading a particular text, they can look at this index to see if there is a hymn that addresses either the topic of that text or specifically the text itself. So I've been working, I'm kind of working on that. I'm kind of working on the book. And then there's another index sort of thing that I'm also working on. So lots of stuff, and it's kept me busy. And anyway, so no videos, but and that'll probably be the way it is. I may not have weekly videos as I try to get these projects done, because to me they're probably more valuable because more time will be spent in the preparation of them. Having said that, it's nice to have the videos. That's why I call them theological leftovers, because there are times where you know, something's just rolling around up here in my brain, and it doesn't fit into a Bible class, it doesn't fit in the worship service, or any of the things I got planned, and I can throw it out here. Which is, by the way, why I love the idea of feedback, because most of this stuff isn't, you know, terribly studied and well thought out. It's just, you know, ideally conversation, but I don't get a lot of feedback. So if you watch these, let me know, and if you have questions about it or disagree or whatever, let me know that too. I would appreciate the feedback. Today, what I've been thinking about, and this has kind of been in my mind for a couple of weeks since the Ascension. We celebrated the Ascension of Jesus, and there was one particular part of Luke chapter 24 that I started thinking about in relationship to other passages that I hadn't considered them together before. Let me read to you Luke 24. Part of it. It says, and they worshipped him. This is after the ascension of Jesus, and it's talking about the disciples who saw him ascend. It says, and they worshipped him and returned to Jerusalem with great joy, and were continually, where? In the temple, praising and blessing God. Why were they in the temple? And this has been on my mind, because I'm like, well, this isn't just a one-time thing. This isn't just till Pentecost. Even later on with Paul, we see Paul immediately when he gets into a new town, where does he go? He goes to the synagogues, right? I suppose in my head, and I don't think this is wrong, but I'm not sure it's a complete answer to why temples and synagogues. I think in my head, what my thought was that I thought of it in terms of evangelism. I thought of it in terms of, these are the best places to go because here are the devout, here are God's people who have the Old Testament, who believe in God, but who don't know the gospel. So let's go there for them. And I think that's true. But this is before Pentecost. This is while the disciples are told to wait. They could have gone back to the upper room because that's where they were before Jesus rose from the dead. But they go and they spend, it sounds like it says that continually they're in the temple and they're praising and they're blessing God. That doesn't sound like evangelism exactly, even though people probably noticed. This sounds like worship. And And so when they went to worship, they went to the temple, which is interesting because that's Luke 24. In Luke 19, Jesus went to the temple right after, on Palm Sunday. He comes in, makes a beeline right for the temple, starts overturning money, the tables of the money lenders, and he calls them all. He calls the temple a den of thieves. Right? That's Luke 19. That's not that many verses before Luke 24, where the disciples are in the temple praising and blessing God after the ascension of Jesus. Luke 23, this is describing the crucifixion of Jesus. The temple is mentioned in relationship to Jesus' death. He dies, and what happens in the temple? The temple veil is torn in two, and we always look at that and say, see, the temple's no longer necessary. But that's not exactly the message of the temple veil being torn in two. What it's saying is the temple's been opened up. That dividing barrier between mankind, humanity, and God has been rent asunder because Jesus has paid the price for the sins. Right? So that thing that kept the sinners from the holy God has been removed because God has come in the flesh to take on the sinner's sin and to give the sinner righteousness, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean that the temple doesn't serve a purpose. Apparently, it still does, right? Because that's where the apostles go to. Now, this isn't, I think, just them going to be evangelists. This is them going to be where God has promised to be. Even later on, Paul, when he's been all over the place and he's made this collection for the poor in Israel, and he comes back and he prepares himself and he goes to the temple. He gets in all kinds of trouble while he's there, but he goes to the temple, not for evangelism purposes, but because that's where God's promised to be, right? Now, God, ultimately, the temple is just it points us to Jesus, and there'd be no efficacy to the temple. There'd be no forgiveness there. The presence of God wouldn't dwell there for the purpose of giving forgiveness if Christ had not come. And that's a conversation, if it doesn't make sense, I'd be happy to have with you. But God works through means. God promises to be where he promises to be, and the temple is that place. And so they go there, not just for others, but for themselves. That whole thing, as I was thinking about it, caused me also to think about a passage, a very familiar passage that I don't know if I've ever completely understood, probably still don't. But it's from the 23rd Psalm, where the psalmist writes, "You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies." And I've always kind of struggled exactly with what that meant, and probably still do. And I don't know if this is a stretch or not. Probably shouldn't even say it, but I'm going to. Are the apostles being at the temple, praising and blessing God, waiting for the gift of the Holy Spirit? Is that an example of God preparing a table for them in the presence of their enemies? When Pentecost comes, they're going to tell all of these people, you crucified the Lord of life, right? The people that were responsible for the crucifixion of Jesus were there with them in the temple. And that's where they went to worship. God was there. God gives the gifts that he promises to give to his children. The enemies are there too. What do you think? Why does it matter? Well, if these guys who watched Jesus crucified would go to the temple where the people who were responsible for the crucifixion of Jesus were, and they would go there not to exact revenge, but to praise and bless God and to receive the gifts that God has promised to give them, what does that say to us? And I know this may be a little bit of a stretch, but think about it. What does that say to us when we have problems in our congregational life? When we have a pastor that we don't like, we have trouble getting along with, or pastors, you have members that you have trouble getting along with. You think, I got to get, either they got to leave or I got to leave. Bam, when this is going on, what happens? And I'll even take it a step further. And I don't know if I have clear answers for all this. I'm just throwing it out there. What happens when you run into some error, or in teaching, or when there's a practice that doesn't match with the teaching? I'm not saying it certainly should be addressed. And I'm not saying there isn't a time to go. I think there is. But the church hopping thing, the smorgasbord of churches, right? The way that we deal with conflict in the church by just bouncing to the next place. Does this have anything to say to us? Is there something here for us to consider? I think maybe all of this could be summed up, and maybe we can talk about it further. If you're interested, let me know, in talking about the distinction that we sometimes make between the visible church and the invisible church. I don't know. I haven't thought that far ahead. But I'd be curious in your thoughts. How does all this fit together? Why did the disciples go back to the temple? Did they have to? Where has God promised to be with the gifts that we need? And are there reasons to stay away from that place where God promises to be to give us the gifts? What reason would be big enough that we would stay away from the place where God promises to give us the gifts we need of forgiveness, life, and salvation? The place where his word and his sacraments are. What's a big enough reason to run away, to stay away? I hear lots of reasons. Are any of them any good? I don't know. This is where my mind's been at. I'm interested in some feedback. Let me know what you think, and maybe we'll talk about it further. If you don't let me know what you think, then I'll come up with something else to talk about later. I hope that you will consider, especially if you're in the Evansville area, joining us here at Concordia, our Bible class. We're talking about things that are kind of hidden, forgotten, not hidden, but forgotten treasures in the church this year. And right now we're looking at the formula of Concord, not only because it is a forgotten treasure, but because it points to the gift of unity, and specifically unity that is based on a common confession of faith. And that's certainly a forgotten thing in the church. So we've been talking about that. That's you can be a part of that conversation. It starts at 9 o'clock. And then at 10:30 is the divine service, and you are most welcome to join us for that. God bless you all, and God bless your week.